This is our second technical talk. I'm joined today by Airfoil. Airfoil reached out to actually discuss about privacy involved with Sarcophagus and what that entails. So, Airfoil, you want to give any type of background on what you're really going to cover in today's talk?
Yeah, so thank you, Quickchange. So thank you guys for joining, right? I like the idea of what we're going to do here after diving into like the nitty-gritty of what not just Sarcophagus as a protocol is, but also diving into, use cases, potentiality of, the power of what Sarcophagus is aiming to solve, and then also the pitfalls or potential pitfalls or ways to avoid pitfalls when interacting with Ethereum or interacting, with these layer ones. What privacy implications exist and how we can try and best solve that, or best practices that you as a user can avoid or best mitigate so you can be as private as possible if you're deploying contracts or if you're deploying a Sarcophagus. So right now we are displaying the PowerPoint if we want to pop over. So today, privacy, right? So right here we've got privacy is one of the most important aspects of Sarcophagus. Your file is being uploaded to the internet. If the information tied to that process is not private, there's always a chance that a malicious event could occur to you or your file. So understanding that privacy plays a massive role in whatever you are putting inside this sarcophagi, inside your payload, because in the end, whatever goes in there, if a potential party finds out more information they find that an attacker or a potential bad or a malicious bad party can figure out from you, they can go and try and use it to either try and uncover or figure out more ways to get access to these files, right? So it's this like metadata leakage, this extra leakage or this extra data that goes inside the sarcophagi. If a malicious party finds out what that trigger is to flip that sarcophagi, if it's a date, if it is some kind of tooling that can also flip that sarcophagi, and they are trying to figure out where that endpoint is going, right? In the end, that extra data that an attacker finds out from, what the date is even from this flipping, from when this will be activated, is another potential point that an attacker can try and leverage, right? Cool. Okay, so anybody else want to jump in on just this?
Yeah, I actually do. So what Airfoil is covering, right? He's going into detail of how important it is to actually have the privacy. But something to think about is when a network is so early, there's only a few people using it, right? So it's much easier to track someone even without tools. You don't need tools to be able to track someone creating a transaction on the blockchain, right? Especially something that is an ERC20. It's very easy to track. It's an accounting based network, right? So it's meant to be able to track it, right? Just so you can see, it was meant to make it easier for you. But because of that, because it's related to Sarcophagus, if you complete a transaction and you know what you're looking at, someone can actually see what is going on. And if you have a timestamp and you know what's going on, that's something that is important to be aware of, because it's not as private as you think. And that's something, there's some obfuscation that goes on when there's more people, not that it's completely privatized, right? There's some pseudonymity that you can use, but that's something we're going to get into as we go further through on the actual topic.
Correct. I want to also add that point. Ethereum itself and a lot of these account-based blockchains, they're poor for privacy, right? You've got that pseudo-anonymity when you are trying to use it, but if your name is somehow attached, if you've got a .eth, if you've got a foil.eth, well, every transaction I do is tied to my identity, right? That's just very poor. If you are trying to send a transaction that might have a payload that is potentially is groundbreaking, or is you expect that people on the other side of this payload could not like the results, that you put yourself at risk. So tying your identity to these, the tying up of a sarcophagi, or pushing up a sarcophagi, or locking up a sarcophagi to be unlocked at a certain time, you are putting yourself at risk. So understanding the risks that exist, right, and then knowing, best practices, right. And so I'm also going to touch on, Ethereum, this chain being account based, ways that you can try and obfuscate as best as possible your deployment of sarcophagi. So moving on, V1 privacy sarcophagus, right? There's data privacy, right? You've got this idea of privacy going into, people cannot see what's inside the sarcophagi, right? If I'm just a normal viewer of the chain, right, it's encrypted, but I can still tell, I as a malicious party who is viewing the chain, watching Alice deploy a sarcophagi, I can see that something was deployed, right? That is not hiding, the chain does not hide that transaction from happening. The only thing is, I cannot tell. So I can tell that a sarcophagi was deployed. I cannot tell what's inside the sarcophagi, right? And there's privacy of the embalmer, right? The person who's pushing the sarcophagi, Alice in this case, right? Private by default in the sense that we don't know what is inside the sarcophagi, but it's not private by default in the sense that I, as a passive viewer, as a malicious party who is trying to surveil the chain or who is surveilling the chain, I can still see that there was our sarcophagi pushed, right? And it was coming from a certain person, but I cannot tell what's inside that sarcophagi, right? So to that point, that's why it's always important to understand, who is pushing this data. If Alice is pushing it, understand that it can be seen. A passive adversary who is watching the chain, who is surveilling the chain, can see that Alice, if I know that Alice's public key is this, or that Alice's address is this address that is pushing the transaction, I can see that Alice has submitted a transaction, a sarcophagi. I just cannot tell what's inside it, right? So private in the sense that the payload, the sarcophagi, is private, right? Privacy of the archaeologist, right? Registering archaeologist appears on chain, right? If I know the public key of the archaeologist, or if I know, I can see, once again, as a passive adversary, as somebody who is surveilling the chain, I can see that this public key is running as an archaeologist, right? So with that, once again, the identity around that archaeologist is huge. Because now, if I'm a malicious party and I do not want whatever, if I somehow find out that what the payload is, if I find out who the public key is, right, or who the owner is of the public key in this scenario, I'm just working through the scenario, and I know who the archaeologist is, and I am a passive adversary with a lot of money, right, or with a lot of resources, I can try and go after that archaeologist, try and take them down, right? In the end, if we want to build a robust system, the archaeologist who is trying to run as strong and as robust a service as possible should aim for also trying to remain as private as possible. Ethereum is not very helpful with this just because of how this account-based system works. It is not. There are tools that you can try, once again, to obfuscate, to make yourself further private on chain. It is not completely anonymous, but you can make yourself a little more private. But like I said, that archaeologist, that publishing of that data is public, right? Domain purchase requires personal information, right? How exactly you can go and purchase domains as privately as possible. Because if you are using KYC information, if you are paying with a credit card, you are tying your identity to that domain purchase. That is a huge vulnerability, right? That is a huge attack surface. You are creating a large attack surface right there if you are attaching your identity with your credit card to the domain purchase that you're using, right? And of course, web server needs an IP, right? You can do a local server, right? Local server, there are issues with running a local server, right? You need to make sure that however you are accessing the open web, you're doing it as securely as possible. Or you've got a VPS. A VPS, once again, you want to make sure that you use a system that you can pay for it as privately as possible. Putting your, once again, KYC information, your credit card information, which is tied to your identity, it doxes you, right? So understanding the potential risk there. Local server, same thing. If you're running it out of your home, understand what that looks like. And we'll address what local server potentials exist and VPSs exist. So, anything else before I move on? Quickchange, would you like to jump in, or Johnny or anybody else, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I'm really glad you touched on that bit about the domain names and whatnot, because after setting up my archaeologist, I did kind of realize that myself. That it's like, well, it is registered to a domain name, and I'm not entirely sure that my info that I use to buy that domain is secure or unsearchable. So, yeah, really, really great point.
Yeah, there's you're spot on. Like you going through it, you see the potential risk there, right? And you assume that in the end, the archaeologist is a service provider, right? And that is a potential choke point, right? It's a single point of failure currently. So with that, if once again you are a malicious, if I'm a malicious party and I want to go after whatever it is, I don't like Alice for some reason, and I see that they push some kind of sarcophagus, and I see the archaeologist, I know the public, and I know the identity, then it's much easier for me as this malicious party to go and stop that archaeologist. If I know they're running a local server, then just go after them locally. If I know they're running a VPS, right, and I am a very well-funded adversary, well, it makes it much easier if I know who the VPS is, or where it's running out of, right? So these are all things that should be considered and applied properly. Quickchange, anything else you want to add? And if not, we can pop in.
Yeah, I actually do. So just like that scenario, think about it this way, right? And this is why I keep bringing up the number of archaeologists, number of users. If there's only a few users, right? So let's say there's 5 archaeologists. I'm just looking at the test network. There's about 5 archaeologists, right? Every time you create a transaction, you are, you're on chain, right? So you when you put a bounty, right? You put a fee. That's what's appearing on chain. So when that appears on chain, right? Someone can also look at where the collateral side, right? You'd obviously need to know who the archaeologists are, which, since you have a domain, you can now get the IP address. You can then, look for a database to see who actually owns the addresses, right? So that's something to think about, because someone can actually go through that and tell you where that's coming from, or tell what archaeologist is actually holding holding the sarcophagus. And it doesn't matter, what you're doing. If let's say that person the person using is the person who's an embalmer, let's say they're a malicious actor, and they want to get someone to take down, all the archaeologists. They can just put, malicious. They can be malicious on their end and have someone else, kind of cause someone else to look at your archaeologist, and you're aiding that person. So it's not just, oh, I need to keep my information safe because I'm going to be hacked. It's like, no, your stuff can be taken down by essentially the state if that information is out there, right? And you can say, oh, I'm just helping. I'm decentralized. But let's say again that person is has codes to nuclear weapons, and they're on a black market. People are looking poorly upon that, so they're saying, what? Anyone who's helping this person, doesn't matter who you are, we can go after them. And then your archaeologist, which is genuine and a good actor, is then caught in the crossfire, right? So it's not just about, oh, I'm acting good, I'm doing everything properly. It's like you have more to actually think about, because of how the network works. So that's why it's important to say, okay, we want this to remain private, because there's no reason for someone to be taken down for no good reason, or for some type of malicious act against you, whether it's you're doing it or someone else. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't affect your network or your archaeologist. Your archaeologist should never be able to be seen or go down. That's kind of where V1 to V2 is changing, and that's what we're going to kind of get into now.
Correct. Yeah. In the end, if you've got a point of failure, right, that third parties or security holes, right? It doesn't matter what it is. So as best as possible, trying to minimize your exposure as a third party, because that exists, because you exist as a third party, it's a potential choke point, right? Understanding that problem and going from there. So moving on, version 2, privacy of sarcophagus. What we're looking for, and we can obviously dive in a little deeper. So data privacy, 2 layers of encryption that follows the same makeup, harder lock on the information, and then we've got privacy of the embalmer, right? So we are looking to, along with that sarcophagus creation on chain. That stuff still seems like it follows that same privacy model. And so privacy of the arch, right? Privacy of the archaeologist, registering archaeologist appears on chain. But now we've got new features. libp2p, replacing a web server, right? So now you've got this peer-to-peer networking, so that helps prevent us from using this web server. We now use this peer-to-peer protocol to disseminate, or how you interact with the chain, or how you interact on this network, right? So trading of sarcophagi. So now, along with that, multiple archaeologists. So now we're avoiding that single point of failure. This was a big concern for us, right? And we are now minimizing that trust of a single party, right? And so now we are creating this marketplace where we can have multiple archaeologists, so there are no single points of failure. So now you need collusion from multiple archaeologists, and now that point becomes with a well-funded third party or well-funded malicious party that does not have to just go after a single archaeologist. It needs to take down multiple, and now that increases the cost for them to deploy this or really apply this chokehold. And then you got the Arweave archaeologist, right? It's the archaeologist who's pushing. These are all discussions that we're looking at, pushing just the transaction of Arweave. So now it then takes away that risk from it being a single point of failure. Now there are two people, let's say, or two portions of the archaeologists. One that is more or less working on the Ethereum chain, and the other one that is doing the hosting on the Arweave chain. So we are addressing the idea of having this private, or not this private, but this these single points of failure. This is huge, right? If you're trying to build for an adversarial network, you're trying to build where you assume everyone is a bad actor, right? As best as possible, how do you mitigate this risk, right? We're trying to build this robust network that can go and apply and address, all these potential pitfalls that we see, right? This is not 100% trustless, right? This is trust minimized. We are minimizing the trust, but it makes it much more difficult. Collusion over 12 parties is much more difficult than a single party just deciding that they want to collude with a bad actor, right? So once again, you still have those 12 parties that can collude, but it becomes, the odds of that happening or the difficulty of that being implemented goes up orders of magnitude as opposed to just a single party.
Right now, right, where Sarcophagus is, as someone who uses it or someone who's a part of it, right, I think this is something that we need to revisit this whole conversation, right? Because right now we have the ideas, right? What is the trading of Sarcophagus going to look like? Is that going to be on chain? Is that going to be off chain? What's actually going to occur there? Is there going to be NFTs? Those conversations are actually happening right now on GitHub. You can see the conversations. You can take part of those conversations. But we really need to understand before we can go further, right? When it comes to the multiple archaeologists, are all 5 going to appear on chain, or is it going to be one transaction on chain? And because of how it works with Arweave, you actually don't see them, right? So when that happens, we can see registering your archaeologist. That's a big conversation, right? Is that going to still be the case? As of right now, it looks like yes, you still will register your archaeologist. But after that, when it comes to actual transactions, it's to be determined how that's actually going to appear on chain, right? Those are starting to be solidified. You're starting to get some ideas that they will actually be on chain, but it's is it going to be the whole time, or the first time that there's the creation of the sarcophagus is going to be at the end when you actually decrypt it, or the initial time when you encrypt it, right? That's the question of what's going to be determined. And then at that point, if there's 5 users, right? If it's a 3 of 5 and there's 5 users, what's it going to appear like? It's going to be one contract with multiple addresses in it, multiple signing addresses in it, or is it going to be 5 separate signing, right? 5 separate pieces of signing, right? That's something we got to figure out, and we'll see as V2 starts to be more solidified and more refined. We'll actually see that. And then, of course, when they're actually going through testing, something may not be expected, and we may say, hey, this is actually better to show it another way. So I think as it gets further along, it's important for us as community members to take part in that and say, hey, this displays here, we don't want it to, or this doesn't display here, and maybe it should, with specific reasons or specific cases. We need to kind of be aware of that. And that's why I think it's important. We come back after this, we bring up this technical talk on the privacy sarcophagus again, because I think it's something that needs to be covered.
I think if we are building a network that is trying to address different threat models for sarcophagi, we need to assume, right? We assume a malicious, a very well-funded malicious very well-funded adversaries, right, that will want to go after these sarcophagi, or also the payloads, the information inside these sarcophagi. If we allude to, what journalists, what dissidents will be publishing, you assume that they already have nation-state attackers or nation-state actors that are going after them, right? So this is a massive part of what Sarcophagus is trying to solve for. As best as possible, we want to make sure these people are secure if they are, publishing this information, right? And as best as possible, if we're using a non-private chain, we want to make sure the tools are available for people to publish this information privately, or as private as possible. We do not want people to put themselves in danger if they are using this as more or less like an insurance, or they want to inform other journalists, right? There's a whistleblower that wants to wants to get this to another journalist, and they use it as an insurance tool, right? Just something that they could lord over and keep themselves alive. If this piece of information is what is keeping somebody alive, and a malicious party wants to go after that to take it offline, so they don't have to worry about that whistleblower, right? That's a big point of contention. So we want to make sure that the tools exist for people to deploy this privately and securely as possible. This is a major functionary of what Sarcophagus is, right? And this should always be stressed. This is the foundation of what Sarcophagus is the idea of what you want to deploy, right? Of what you want to deploy, and you want to deploy it securely. So, privacy refinements of Sarcophagus, right? From V1 to V2, you got V1 on the left-hand side, V2 on the right-hand side.
I have a question for you.
Oh, yeah, go. You want to stay here?
I have a question for you.
Yeah, you want to stay
of what? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, go right ahead. I think there's a little delay, but go on.
Okay. When it comes to the Sarcophagus right now, V1, what do you think is the biggest point of privacy concern? Because I was looking at it, and I was thinking that the use of domains, the use of a web server, that's the biggest one, because there is, you can't even be synonymous on that, and that's where I think that plays a big role. So, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, privacy is, if you are trying to be as private as possible, privacy and anonymity, they are not the exact same thing, right? So trying to address as best as possible, just look at each user, right? Let's compare embalmers. Well, let's just focus on embalmers first, because embalmers are not archaeologists. And because of that, they've got two different threat models, and they got two different exposure, they've got two very different privacy profiles. So embalmers, right? How you interact with the chain, right? How you get your funds to to publish the transaction, right? How you are submitting the transaction, right? What exactly, if you're connecting to nodes, what nodes you're connecting to, right? Those are three important things that you see already that need to all be addressed. How you're obtaining those funds, right? How you're getting the sarcophagus, how you're getting Sarco tokens. Like I said, how you're submitting transactions, how you are. What did I say? What was the? Those two, at least those two. I said three, but those two are major points. If you're getting from KYC resources, right, and you are a whistleblower that's trying to remain private, wrong move on your end. You need to understand the power of obtaining assets via no KYC routes, right? Because if this means life or death, buying from an exchange is the wrong move. You are not going to have a good time. Submitting transaction from an IP address, from your home, right? Understand that's a problem, right? If you are doing that from your home IP address, these nodes, if you're how exactly the service whatever you're using to submit the transaction, right? Whoever it is running those nodes can see the IP address where the transaction is being submitted from. That's a big problem, right? Understanding how you should submit transactions. If you're either going to submit over Tor, if you're going to submit via a third party where you push a transaction and the third party submits it, if you're using a VPN to submit your transaction, right? And also that wallet address or that account that you are using. If it has KYC'd assets that are in it, you've also once again doxed yourself. So understanding how to use Ethereum privately, right? These are all huge concerns that need to be addressed and what it looks like. So that's from the embalmer perspective, right? And there's many more, but just at a high level, those things should be considered at all times. Archaeologist, web server, yes, huge, right? How exactly you're obtaining the web server, how you're getting this domain, right? So using services that you can pay via no KYC routes, right? I'm gonna drop resources inside the technical resources chat in the technical discussion room after this with resources for everybody, right? That you can use, but these domains that allow you to pay privately, right? Pay with private cryptocurrency, right? And of course, how are you with that private cryptocurrency? How are you obtaining it, right? You're obtaining it via no KYC routes, because if you are obtaining it via KYC, you once again are doxing yourself. So understand everything that you are interacting with, leaves a trail, and this chain is public. It is on chain forever. If we are expecting this stuff to work forever, it's going to be there forever. So understand the privacy landmines that exist. So domains, huge part. Assets. Once again, how are you obtaining those assets to use as the bond or to interact as the archaeologist, to put up? Once again, how are those funds being obtained? Via private, you are obtaining it via no KYC routes, right? And then also how that public key has interacted on chain, if it's ever interacted before with KYC funds. Once again, you have doxed yourself. So understanding to use one-time use accounts or accounts that you can generate and that have never had any on-chain activity from KYC sources. And then let us see. Oh yeah, how if you're doing a domain or if you're running a local server, it's very difficult to run a local server privately, right? There's been I can't remember his name. Was it Justin Aim who's running? I believe he successfully was able to run a server over Tor. I mean, that's so sick. I think running a hidden service over Tor that makes the network more robust, because now we can have walkthroughs of how you can deploy this, how you can deploy your own hidden service, and you can access your archaeologist from wherever without having to port forward, without having to expose your local IP address, which is amazing, right? Because exposing your local IP address, if you're running a local server, you have an issue there, right? And then it also goes back to, or a privacy issue there, right? So using Tor is helpful. That helps obfuscate or helps, abstract away, your physical identity and your IP address. And then also, once again, I think if you're using VPS, using services, using a VPS that you can go and once again pay privately. You think about everything that happens, everything that you are interacting with as an archaeologist, or in this case also an embalmer, and understand that anything that happens that you are interacting with that has your identity attached to it will be there. So you want to avoid these databases. You want to avoid these identity on chain completely, right? That's the whole idea. Is you want to avoid it completely, because if you have one piece of KYC information, well, that doxes your whole setup. So it's important to address and note. And this is not, once again, we've seen this for time and time again. This is not private. This chain is not private, right? It is there permanently. We expect it to be there forever. So understand the potential risk. And you know what might be perfectly fine now, in 10 years, might not be perfectly fine. And if your data is there forever, understand the potential risk of touching that 10 years ago, right? Because it doesn't matter. That stuff is there forever. And people, companies, these well-funded adversaries will go and they will dig this up to destroy or, cast doubt or cast problems in your direction. So that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think you need to understand whatever your threat model is, or you as the user or you as the service provider, understand the risk that you are, taking up and address it accordingly.
Yeah, that was that part about Justin Aim doing or Justin Aim, I'm not sure how to say the last name, how he did the tour. That's something I wanted to bring up. And same thing with the VPS versus local server. I know in the technical discussion, I believe Ruby, who's actually in this chat, brought up running the server locally and actually wanting to deploy the contracts locally, saying that was actually completed. So, that's something that we're seeing as Sarcophagus starts to mature, you're seeing more people from different areas or from the same kind of circles starting to jump in and do something a little bit more, push the envelope a little bit more, say, oh, this can be a little bit more private, this can be a little bit more secure by using Tor, by running it locally, right? Your VPS, when you buy your VPS, you are putting your information out there. When you are getting your domain, you're putting your information out there. Yes, are there things you can do to make it more private and more secure? Of course. But the mere fact is, to get a lot of this, you have to put your information out there to be able to purchase it. So taking care of that, having the ability and the wherewithal to set it up locally, that can help people in the future. And you can, if you're doing that and you're setting something up locally or you're running something over Tor, documentation or a video will go a long way. And if you something that I did, I've worked with web servers before, but with this specific web server, I was able to do a little bit more than what I was used to doing when I set up the initial tutorial for setting this up, right? There's documentation that you can use, but I figured, you know what, if I'm doing this and I've done it, a couple times now, why not make a video? And it's things like that that's going to help push people a little bit further on what they're trying to
Yeah, you nailed it. And also, like anything that you were touching, either be it on chain or off chain, but getting these servers right, they are not linked in the sense that whatever you buying your server, of course that's not going on chain. If you're paying with the credit card, that does not, your credit card like purchase and go on chain. But no matter what, there is this kind of link that you are using, and if you've got a well-funded adversary, right, they will go and grab whatever links and they can combine it, or they can go and be pressed by legally or by their jurisdiction where they are operating to go and release that information. So the fact that the information is stored there in the first place is a problem. So you avoid that at all costs. Moving on, if anybody else has questions, obviously jump in. But moving on, Quickchange, if you've got other questions, feel free. So, like I was stating before, real quick, let's see. Is everybody? You guys can hear me, right? I just don't hear anybody. So.
Yeah, you're good to go.
And you don't have any questions? Did you have other questions?
I'm monitoring the chat. I see Edsy. You have a question? I see you popped up.
Yeah, I was actually thinking, so at all points, right, the recipient address is supposed to be on-chain, like a blockchain address, say ERC20. Yeah.
So that's not necessarily true, right? So you can actually, when you're setting up the sarcophagus, you're taking the public key of the recipient address to encrypt it. However, if I have a wallet and I have an address that, let's say it's me and you, right? We want to set up a sarcophagus. I want you to be able to decrypt it. So you have the wallet. I can take your public key and encrypt something, and then pay for it with my wallet, and no one will know who that belongs to, or if that's even related to this wallet, until it comes time to decrypt, and they try to decrypt it with my private key, which it won't work, right? So you can actually separate that as well. You can take it one step further, and it's recommended, if you want to keep this more secure, don't use the private key of the wallet that you're actually encrypting with. I mean, don't use the public key of the wallet you're paying with, that you're putting it on chain with.
Yeah. So I get it. What I'm trying to say right now is, I see a problem here. The problem I see right now is, say the global adoption of the blockchain space, crypto and all that is little right now. We're looking at less than 6%, less than 5-6% of global adoption. Say I'm a whistleblower, and I have this all important file I want to send to a journalist, and the journalist, I don't even want this man to know it's coming from me, and I have no idea how to get this man's private key, or if he has one at all, if he has a blockchain wallet or stuff like that. So how do I go about this? So if we're, say, operating a Web 2, if we're running Web 2 nodes, you could easily get someone's email address and mail it to them. But we are dealing Web 3 and blockchain right now. So how do you go about this where in a situation you don't want you want this to be so private, you don't want your identity to be out there, and you also don't know how if the person has a blockchain address, and if they do, how do you get their private key for the encryption and all that stuff? So it's a bit mind-boggling.
So that's a good question, right? This is the pain points, and this is just an issue with how exactly you first try and like create communications between a party, and trying to remain as private or as trustless as possible. So to that point, it's like more or less creating the handshake, the first way you transmit information. If I know who my party is, the recipient or the person who's going to be the embalmer, and I will host their archaeologist. Let's say something like that. They're a journalist, and you want to host it for them. Let's just in this scenario, and this is like the problem of first of all, just like onboarding, right? If this person doesn't understand how blockchains work or how Ethereum works, you're gonna have a tough time, right? So then, along with that, how exactly do you transmit this information securely, right? So you have to use secure channels. You got to communicate via secure channels to get this information. If you can first link up and create a secure channel with that person, then you can do a lot of the walkthrough yourself with the journalist, with that end user. And then you can solve a lot of the issues that you're trying to figure out. And of course, you can then use a one-time use. They can use a one-time use public key. You can use a one-time use public key for your archaeologist. Set it up, do whatever you need, and then let it go. And that would be as best as possible. As long as the funds that you're getting also are private, then you should be good. Like from that perspective, like a privacy perspective, that manages 90% of the potential risk. But of course, you need to make sure everything that they're doing, and this is a potential pitfall, is that they are not stepping on any privacy landmines, and you along the way are also not stepping on privacy landmines. But I think in that case, the first thing is setting up private communications between you and the potential embalmer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then from there, then it's also then deploying it privately. And then that sort of goes to what we're trying to address here. But a lot of that stuff happens in the meat space. For this first step, takes place in the meat space in the normal world, like IRL.
And that's to say there's actually no way to get your files to whoever you want it to get to without establishing prior communications.
So I mean, if you've got like it depends. Like if you want to go and add, like if they understand how to use the chain, right, and then you are running the service and you're advertising that, hey, I've got an archaeologist, and you can use mine, and you've got your information out there, then they can obviously use you, and that's perfectly fine. That exists. But if it's something like this party, and then they don't understand how to use the chain, they don't understand how to use Sarcophagus, then that's a little more difficult because you have to, like, if they don't understand, you need to be able to first walk them through. And if you are really trying to go and say, listen, if they don't understand how to use Ethereum or how to use Sarcophagus, they're going to, privacy-wise, because Ethereum, because of how it's architected, it is just very poor for privacy. So if they are trying to, as best as possible, mitigate the risk, they need to understand how the chain works, and so that's why I more or less suggested that you reach out via secure channel and communicate. But also you can, if you're an archaeologist, you can also create guides, right? If you've got resources yourself, creating, hey, listen, this is what you should do, this is what you should grab, this is what you should implement. If you're trying to deploy this properly or privately, so I think there's that too, and you are going to see, archaeologists, you're going to see more tools that come out that deploy this. I mean, this right here is a perfect example. Anybody that is new or that wants to figure out how to do this privately, they can go and even jump in on this video or see, this discussion, and then take away and understand a little bit more about how privacy can help either the end user, the archaeologist, or the embalmer. So I appreciate the question, Essie. That's great. I love that. Anything else? While we've got, you can see the comparison between V1 and V2. I'm not going to read this off, but you see obviously further anonymity tools on the left-hand side. VPN for all. Obviously understanding what your VPN is. Your VPNs, they're sort of like a shady business. right? You are not removing the trust if you use a VPN. VPN is not, the silver bullet, right? You need to understand that VPNs themselves, you are just moving your trust from your ISP, from your internet service provider, to the VPN provider. So how exactly did you pay for that VPN, right? And this is submitting for transactions, right? How exactly did you pay for that VPN? If you paid with your credit card, well, and now that VPN provider can see when you're pushing transactions to the chain. So once again, if you've got a well-funded adversary or this information is there, that also comes into play. So understand the risk even going with your VPN and understand. Do your research on VPNs. When you go look at these websites that do these VPN comparison charts that show top 10 VPNs, a lot of times it's BS. Those VPN companies pay to get on those lists. So you need to go and do your research and understand that a lot of these VPN companies are run by, former intelligence, intelligence members of the community or intelligence agents, right? They're grabbing this information and you don't really know what you're doing. You don't really know, they've got audits, right? But in the end, right, as best as possible, you want to use VPNs that can, once again, allow you to as privately interact as possible. Tor for your archaeologists, using I2P as for archaeologists, another overlay network, right? Tor itself, I2P. There's other networks that are being developed that can also be utilized. I think these tools, once again, it's all just tools in our tool belt. There are no silver bullets, but you want to make it as, it's more or less, it's Legos, right? We are combining these different tools to address these different vulnerabilities, these different privacy leaks, and address it as best as possible. Now then, looking at V2, what exactly the Embalmer, it looks like the same security model from Embalmer version 1 to V2, right? Archaeologists, different ways to interact with the network, right? Trader of Sarcophagi using this peer-to-peer protocol, and then multiple archaeologists to mitigate that risk, right? It's not trustless, it's trust minimized. And then also refinement, right? VPNs, like what we mentioned, but also, other ways. I expect that we will also be able to have Tor using I2P, potentially using NIM for these, like this mesh network or this mixnet to deploy these archaeologists, right? There are different threat models. There are different risk factors for a archaeologist compared to an embalmer. Understand your risk and apply accordingly. Anything else before I hop on and just mention a few things that I wanted to address? I'm not checking the questions, so if somebody sees the questions, just can you read them to me?
Yeah, I'm looking now. I don't see any that have come up.
Okay, great. If you don't see any, so I want to just mention I'm going, like I mentioned, like I alluded to previously. I'll submit research to follow up in a technical discussion room, but I also I mentioned embalmer privacy versus archaeologist privacy. I'll also put a quick little bullet point so you can understand if you are an embalmer what your privacy model will look like and what you need to address properly. And then archaeologists, how you can do this privately, right? Like I stated, there were three things that I stated. One is obtaining funds privately, right? Next one is web server, how exactly you do that privately. So, private domains, like buying it privately. And then also the one thing, the third thing that I couldn't remember before, but I alluded to, is also how you submit your transactions privately, right? Because in the end, if you've got a global passive adversary that is, watching the chain, they can pick up this information, and if they can find your IP address, if a global passive adversary can disseminate what your IP address is, well, that means they can figure out your location. And if they can figure out your location, that means they can figure out your identity. So important things to address, right? And important things to consider. So I'm going to drop that information, but along with that, here I'm just minimizing out of here. I just want to make sure. Do you guys still see this that privacy refinements of Sarcophagus? Do you still see that window, or do you see anything else? I just want to make sure I'm not sharing.
Yeah, I see the privacy refinements of Sarcophagus.
But that's it, right? You don't see any other doc?
No other docs besides that.
Great. Okay. So what's important is, like I said, Ethereum. And so these are just the last points, and the TLDR, right? The potential risks that exist. I want to focus on private transactions, right? There are tools, there are resources that exist today that you can more or less privatize your on-chain information or on-chain data. ZK.money is a great source published by the Aztec team, right? So you can take your ETH, you can take assets, put them into ZK.money, and they come out and they got a large anonymity set, and that is what Quickchange was alluding to before when he was mentioning, the more users that you've got, the larger the anonymity set, right? You want more users using your network. The more that you use the network, the bigger the crowd that you can hide in is. So ZK.money or Tornado Cash, two good resources. Though Tornado Cash, its front end is now censoring, right? So, and if we're looking for censorship resistance, that is a pretty trash way, to go. But you still have that ability if you can still use that smart contract. So Ethereum's poor privacy for account sharing. You need to understand that you need to avoid KYC avenues. If you have used KYC, you can use these tools to further obfuscate, move from one address to another with more or less entering a black box. And your funds go into a black box and come out to a different address. So that is huge. That's important if you are looking for ways to try and break up that link for your non-KYC funds. And then also consider just never commingling KYC and non-KYC funds. That's just like a big no-no. You should not be doing that anyway. And then also consider going no KYC. This is what this money, this is what this exists. This is why all this money exists. It is to avoid censorship, right? So you do not need to use these third-party intermediaries to go get your funds. That is the antithesis of what we are building for, right? We are not building for these walled gardens. Understand that KYC will be used to censor, will be used to blacklist. Doesn't matter who you are. Look 10 years from now, if whoever it is that's in charge, doesn't matter left, right, it doesn't matter who it is in charge, if they have a way to identify, right, and that identification comes from KYC, if there is a way to do that, they will do it. They will use it against you. So look for no KYC routes, build those resources now before it becomes more difficult for you to find these no KYC routes. Along with that, I wanted to mention, like I said, local server versus over Tor. Understanding, that Tor helps, running these hidden services as opposed to local server. Running it locally is not very good privacy-wise, but using tools where you can use your own nodes, right, to publish transactions, that is helpful instead of you doxing yourself to use other services or using other nodes that push your transactions. If I am running a node and you are pushing your transaction through me, I can obviously pick up that information and I can figure out that it is you or it is this IP address that is pushing this transaction. So understand that having a node, running your own node, is beneficial. There is privacy there. Ethereum developers do not talk about this. Ethereum, people on the Ethereum network, do not talk about this enough. Running your own node helps in the privacy toolkit. I'm going to go and put suggestions for private VPSs or private domains that you can use to get access to, right? I'll post that in the technical. I just don't have the list right in front of me, but I will push that also. I think that's really everything I want to hit, and I think that's really it. Any other questions? I'm going to just go back to this title screen. Any other questions before I hop? And I guess, any other questions?
I just have some comments. So this is a big deal, right? This is why Sarcophagus exists, because you don't want to have to rely on using a formalized, attorney to do something that you need to do, or a proprietary software that you can't control. Imagine you're using something that they can just, by a snap of fingers, everything you have is gone, right? You don't want to deal with that. You don't want to even have to think about it. So why not take that into your own hands and do it yourself? And you can, but obviously there's a little bit of a learning curve. Once you get past that learning curve, it's like, okay, everything you're doing makes sense, makes it easier, makes you, kind of carefree in how much you have to actually think about worrying. You can make it foolproof, and that's what Sarcophagus is going towards, right? We're seeing that they're having a discussion. What is going on right now? And if that's what the plan is to go towards a private and secure network that you don't have to worry about because of the decentralization, then why not continue to express that and how much you appreciate it and what else you think that is hard or makes it harder for you to be more private. I mean that's the whole reason why it's that the conversation of lib P2P is going on, right? A web server, a domain, one, not only is it hard for someone to do that's not used to it, but it's also it's almost against privacy in that regard, right? We want to make it easier and a more secure and private activity. So that's why it's nice to jump in those conversations. I've jumped in, it's something outside looking in. I'm seeing these discussions going on, and I have questions. And you're seeing that guys from Decent that are responding, they're very responsive. I had conversations today. I didn't know. I think there was a question asked in a technical discussion. I only know, enough to be able to set up an archaeologist and how I set it up and kind of how the web servers work. There was a question on setting it up locally. That question was asked, and in a couple hours it was answered. So we need to keep asking those questions. That's how we learn, and that's how we could say, okay, this is more private, this is more secure, this is harder for users, easier for users. That's exactly what these talks are meant to do. It's meant to explain away the kind of magic that surrounds cryptocurrencies, and especially Sarcophagus.
Yeah, distributed systems is a reason that we suggest distributed systems, decentralized systems. We understand the risk around these third parties or these arbiters, right? And these tools, right? These discussions evolve, right? Nobody has, once again, the silver bullet for everything. And we're gonna have more talks, just even specifically around privacy. This is a nice discussion to consider, or a nice thing or a nice topic to discuss, right? Because we're looking at what we're trying to solve for. It could just be a small sarcophagus that you just want to go and send. You want to just go send a private message to a friend, and you just want you like the intuitive nature of what sarcophagus does. But you might also have something that is life or death on the line that you're inputting into the sarcophagi. How do you solve for that? But you want to make sure that your threat model and the risk that you are taking is solved for whatever your potential threat model is. So to that point, I appreciate this, and I like the discussion around this, and I like having this kind of discussion for the community. Before we wrap up, I don't know if we've got any other questions. I think we might be good, but if you got any other questions, please feel free to jump in right now, or if you need to raise your hand, or if not, then we can call it quits.
Yeah, and I'll just going forward, I'm gonna also post another piece in the technical discussion. Airfoil, first off, thank you for joining and doing this with us. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. Also, for those points that you're also going to post, those 3 points that you brought up, some bullet points that'll also help. But also, I'm going to post the next sarcophagus vote, next technical talk vote in the channel, just to see what everyone's recommending. If that technical talk already occurred, it's not going to be on there, and this privacy talk will actually be brought back after V2 is done, and we will focus more on V2 and what it's doing. Probably give it a couple months to actually understand how it's working, and the ins and outs by more than just the developers. We'll get all that knowledge, and then we'll have this follow up conversation. Where did we go, and where are we now? So I'm going to post the vote in the technical discussion. I will wait until after Airfoil posts his information for everyone to actually see and learn, and then I'll give it some time before I post the next vote. And I'm looking to have that, and anyone who wants to co-host, depending on what is chosen, I'll give it I'll give it a couple days for the vote to pass, and then if someone wants to, depending on the topic, if you want to co-host with me, feel free. Again, this is not very. I will work with you. I will make I'm going through the slides. I'm updating the slides. I'm updating the discussion points. So it's very easy to do. I'll make it very painless, but I know it's sometimes a little hard to have those conversations in front of people if you're not used to it. So I will make it very painless. And it's nice to actually get the community involved. Anyone who's interested in a conversation that comes up, feel free to just jump in, ask me if you can do it, and we can do that together.
It is great. This is the community right here, right? So, we just want to build. We want to make, like I said, build a strong, robust system, right? No one person is managing this, right? And if you've got ideas, push them forward. And you know what? If you want to go and take it on yourself, Quickchange doesn't need to be co-hosting, right? It's not managing the whole thing. So feel free, right? We can go, and if people want to hear it, then we can go and build. So I appreciate this. I appreciate the discussion. So we will talk soon. Thank you guys for coming. Have a wonderful.
I do have a question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I want to ask if someone is passing his inheritance to, let's say, his children. What are the protocols that the person will need to put in place? Because in terms of privacy, not letting them know who is taking this portion or who is going to take this other portion, and in terms of the privacy of his wealth when passing it down to his children, how is that protocol going to work?
So
If I may,
jump in, Johnny.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just gonna say, Mystican, I saw that you came in kind of late, and we did cover all of this really early on. And I will have a recording out again, but Airfoil, if you want to answer that.
Yeah, I can just answer real quick. So I appreciate the question. I appreciate Johnny also elaborating. Yeah, feel free to also just check out the recording. I appreciate all of that. It just makes it easier. But to that point, it's what exactly you are putting inside that payload. If it's just a private key, in the end, if nobody knows how much, your public key, like if your identity isn't tied to it, then really it's not like people can see what's inside that sarcophagus. So as long as you've got if it's to your children, right? As long as they've got access to that public key, as long as they've got access to that address, that Ethereum address, after the payload after the sarcophagi is unwrapped, they will be able to access it. So, and then the transfer of the private key from one address to another will just look like any other transaction that happens on chain. So there's not much privacy leak there, but it all depends on how exactly you interact with your account currently, right? What that account is. If that account is tied to KYC information, well then, somebody can watch who's watching the chain can see. And when I say KYC, I didn't touch this. KYC is know your customer. It's the information that you need to register when you send facial recognition data, when you send your credit card, when you send your license to an exchange. That is the information that the exchange keeps and stores on you. So that KYC information is what can be used to dox you if there's ever a data breach at these exchanges. And it's a matter of time before these exchanges just get hit with these data breaches. If somebody knows that you are buying Ethereum or you're buying Sarco and it's tied to your identity, to your Ethereum address, well then somebody can figure out that, okay, well that is Nisikon, right? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Okay, listen, I appreciate your guys' time. Like I said, I will drop resources into the technical discussion, and anybody else can go dive into, ask more, and feel free to interact. All right, guys. Thank you. See you guys.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks everyone for being here, and I will get the recording of this posted up as soon as possible. Thanks everyone.